Dean and I have been known to forget to do that. So
Heavens.
heavens, yes. Uh, all right. So one other request. I think most people have already turned off their audio, but please do so during Professor Garber's talk so that there's no background noise that could, like, my dog barking that could interfere with people being able to hear him. In fact, I'll unmute mine right now. But before I do, I'll turn it over to Dean for the formal introductions.
Okay. I'll add my welcome to you all. And we are very happy to have Dr. Eugene K. Garber with us today to talk about his book, Maison Christina, a novel. He is a University at Albany Distinguished Teaching Professor Emeriti. He has published 7 books of fiction and is the creator, with 8 other artists, of Eroica, a hypermedia fiction. His fiction has won the Associated Writing Program's Short Fiction Award and the William Goyen Prize for Fiction, sponsored by Tri-Quarterly. His awards include fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the New York State Council of the Arts. His short fiction has been anthologized in the Norton Anthology of Contemporary Fiction, 1988, Revelation, and other fiction from the Seone Review, the Paris Review Anthology, and Best American Short Stories. Welcome, Dr. Garber.
Thank you. I think Ed said he wanted me to make a few remarks just to get things rolling. I haven't really prepared formal remarks, but I'll just say a few words. I began this book probably 5 years ago, and it took me a long time to finish it. The genesis of the book is lost in the clouds of forgetfulness somewhere in the past, and so I can't say much about that. I think probably my process is very common among writers. You begin a draft of a work. You don't really know exactly where it's going. You have some idea of who the people are and the themes and so forth. So you just plunge in and it carries itself along. The unconscious is where all the good stuff comes from, not rational planning. So you end up with a draft, and you know it's imperfect to say the least. So you pass it by a trusted friend or two who tells you some things that make you wonder if you want to keep the book or not. But then so you go through some significant revision, and you come out with something close to a final draft. And then you put the book aside, and I have now for, I forget how long, a year maybe. And then you come back to the book with a different persona. Now you are no longer the writer, you are the interpreter of this book that came from somewhere. And that's what I've been doing over the last day or two. And I looked at the book and I thought, where did that come from? It is kind of amazing and amusing that when you reread a book you've written a year later, there's all kinds of stuff in there you didn't know about. Now, some of it, of course, was quite familiar, but some of it not. And then I thought, what is this book about anyway, if anything? And I thought, well, I think there are 2 major themes. There's some other strands to the tapestry, but the major themes of the book, I believe, are the struggle of many of the characters in the book against the sort of maelstrom power of nothingness and how to escape that. And the other major theme, I think, is what are stories, how are they put together, what are their powers, uh, who tells them, and what about the people inside the story. And I think maybe I'll just stop there and let you open up with remarks, questions, whatever you like. I'll try to respond or not.
Anyone with a question or comment?
Yeah, if you do, there's several ways. Obviously, you can just unmute yourself and ask, or you can submit down below through the Q&A feature or under reactions, raise your hand. So there are numerous ways to let us know if you have a question or want to make a comment. Anybody want to start off?
Sure. I'll start off. So, Eugene, how would you describe your process of creating characters? As I know you don't do what we used to call realist fiction, maybe still do exactly, but your characters do seem to be flesh and blood, yet they're not quite the same kind of flesh and blood as some other novelists' kinds of characters. So I'd just be curious to see if you would say a little bit about your process of creating characters.
Okay. When I was putting together my website, and the persons who were helping me said, well, you have to characterize yourself as a writer. And I came up with the term fabulous. And I think that's probably pretty accurate, meaning that the people in my stories, the stories themselves, are, as you say, definitely not realistic. They are sort of fables, certainly imaginary places. It is true, however, that there are aspects of this book that I think are somewhat realistic. So I will say, without diving into awkward autobiographical details, that the following characters bear some resemblance to persons in my past. The mother of Norton, the father of Norton, Norton's aunt, Eddie, and perhaps Norton himself. The nuns I have never met. They are somehow came out of my imagination. Charlene, the catatonic woman, is not somebody I ever met or anything like it. The demon, Valk, made me stop and think that every one of the manuscripts, novel-length manuscripts I produced, has a demon in it. And I thought, why would that be? I never think of myself as demoniacal, and I don't have much interest in demonology, but there they are. Every time I write a novel-length book, there's a demon sticking his head in there. So that demon is simply a proliferating character in my fictions, and that's about all I can say about him. Some of the other demons were nastier than Valk. Valk, I think of as sort of serio-comical demon. But there you have it. Let's see, did I cover all the major characters? I really enjoyed writing about Sister Claire because I think she lives up to her name. There's a great deal of clarity and insight that she has. In fact, if it weren't for her, I think Norton would simply have lived up to his name and be a nothing, which is what he's in danger of when we meet him early in the book. think I've left anybody out. So I don't know, Judy, where do these characters come from? They're not exactly archetypes, but I suspect anybody who characterizes himself as a fabulist is inevitably pilfering concepts of character from who knows where, mythology, Jung, anywhere you might think of. So there is a mix of, just as you pointed out, some interesting aspects of realism, but mixed in with my usual tendency to write fabulous fiction. Hope that helps.
I have a sort of a comment and a question. Took me a while to get my bearings in the book as I tried to figure out what reality I was dealing with at any particular point. But once I did, it became in some ways more like a detective story where I was beginning to look for clues for which reality we were in, and what I could trust in the narrator's comments. So that, for example, when Charlene first begins to speak, I quickly caught on to, oh, she's not speaking English. And I've forgotten its version of Russian, if I recall correctly. And since I had Russian in college, I immediately kind of latched onto that. But there was something later in the story that I thought was a clue to something that was different from what I'd been assuming all in the novel long. But I eventually concluded there's probably a typo in your book. Somewhere about 2/3 of the way through the book, I don't recall exactly where, and I can't tell you what page because I was reading the Kindle edition and the page numbers all changed. There is a line where Norton is referred to as Norton, Norton. And I immediately thought, aha, his name isn't really Norton, it's really Norton, and we're going to hear more about that later on. But then through the rest of the book, he was back to being Norton, which makes sense given everything that's in the book and what you said about without what happened to him with the nuns, he probably would have amounted to nothing, if you will. But I found one spot where there's a Norton where I thought it should say, where I had previously said Norton, and I thought, oh boy, another clue here, and it wasn't a clue.
No, it wasn't a clue. It was an author's error. I'll revert to Pope, who said, even Homer nods. But I'm glad you finally got your bearings. To the extent that it's a mystery story, you might propose two mysteries. Well, actually several, but I'll propose a couple. One is, what happened to Charlene? That's not a real name. You'll know a real name.
Yeah.
What happened to Charlene that plunged her into this catatonic state? There are hints that was some kind of psychosexual trauma, and that may be as close as we're going to get. The other is, now that Charlene has gotten her wings as an eagle, what is she going to do? There's some evidence that she's not going to be a real kindly person when she gets flown out of her eyrie and finds the people who perpetrated these awful things on her. We don't know that for sure. That's left uncertain. The other mystery, I think, is the book opens with a picture of a corpse on a beach. And so the question is, whose corpse is that? Mm-hmm. It's said to be the corpse of a man of the 40s, perhaps. Can't be Norton. Norton is in his 80s when we meet him. But a figure appears up on the cliff looking down at this corpse. seems to be bald. He's redheaded and Teutonic looking. And he shakes his head as though to say, well, inevitably, who's he talking about? So those are mysteries that are in the book, and I'd like to say that Fabulous are not responsible for solving all the mysteries in a book. Realistic novelists, I think, have to wind things up satisfactorily for their readers. Most of them do. And certainly mystery writers can't get away with leaving a whole lot of threads uh, just hanging out there. So there you have it, David.
I like that there is some ambiguity left in some of the issues, the questions that we're trying to solve, and it kind of it provokes more interest and more discussion, more reflection on what the reality is and how we deal with it. So thank you.
Yeah, ambiguity for sure.
Yes.
Hi, Gene. This is Don. I've been reading you for a long time. I just realized that I must have read Metaphysical Tales in the early 80s. It would have been 40 years ago. And you may not know that, and I think maybe Judy Federley may have been in on some of these discussions, that we were always fascinated by your writing as in and of itself. And in fact, we talked about the possibility of, when you were chair, publishing a book of the collected interoffice memos of Eugene Garber because of their extraordinary, not only style, but perfection of structure. So anyway, as I say, I've been reading your work for a long time and watching it for a long time. The thing that you've talked a lot about the sources of it from the unconscious and the sources of it from possibly literary sources like myth and such things. But it seems to me that an awful lot of the writing in all of the stuff of yours, and I think I've read a big part of it, comes out of the writing itself, out of the language itself, and the pleasures of the next word and the pleasures of that sentence. We should talk about that a little bit with us.
Well, in this book, you have an absolute master of palaver. And so your remarks are right on the button with Maison Christina. And I think in many ways that what you say is exactly right. As Norton talks, his talking leads him to the next thing. This is not always, in fact, it's frequently unsatisfactory to his auditors. Vera and Sister Claire and Charlene will all take him up from time to time and say, you've wandered from your story. His answer might have been, oh, never mind the story. Listen to the flow of words and this beautiful language I'm producing for you. But they will call him back to the story. And that is, as I said, I think, the second most important major strand of the book. And that is, you tell a story, you get caught in that story, or maybe you can get free of it. Or maybe if you tell it to the end, it will free you. And I think you probably, all of you, have some sense of where the story leads. As I've already said, in the case of Charlene, we don't know where her story leads. It could be to some awful act of vengeance. It could be a much more free spirit. If she is, as Norton says early in the novel, going to be an eagle, well, eagles are not the kindliest birds in the world, so that would foretell a vengeful Charlene. On the other hand, the influence of Vera and the nuns might suggest a much more kindly future for her. In the scene in the strange building that Paul has put together for Norton and lured him into, we see a Marquis de Sade type character inflicting on prisoners he's assembled some kind of horrible ration, sadistic torture. We don't know if that's really reflective of Charlene's past or something Paul dreamt up on his own. And so I would get back to David's point. There are ambiguities in the novel, and there's uncertainty about how reliable just about anybody telling of the story is in the book. If you take Sister Claire, her story her past comes to us very fractionally. She says at one point she found God, or God found her, after she had sunk deeply into sin. She does not choose to elaborate on it. She does tell a kind of quaint story of when she was an adolescent, and they were going to look in an art book and see if they could find some nude figures. They were at a Catholic girls' school. This would have been very daring, I think, in her day. So they opened the book hoping they'll find some nudes to titillate them. But instead, they find Duchamp's, I think it's the bridegroom descending the stairs, which is anything but erotic. So she gets her comeuppance. But again, you have just a fraction of somebody's past, and it's ambiguous as we encountered it.
Yeah, well, I remember, I mean, your work that I've obsessed with ever since I first read it in Metaphysical Tales is a novella called The Poets, and about these two characters, both of whom presumably are poets in some sense. And it's some of the most, the way it's experienced, me, I'm not saying this was your experience of writing it, but that it seems some of the most obsessive and driven prose I'd ever read. And while many of the themes in this book might be connected in some, at least open, vague way, it seems to me that there's a kind of freedom in your writing at this than there is in those earlier books, which were kind of obsessive in a way. It struck me. I mean, in a very absolutely fascinating way. You have anything to say about that?
Well, it's interesting that that particular story, The Poets, was just seized on by the anthology. It's anthologized in the Swanee Review retrospective. It was the one anthologized in the Norton collection of contemporary fiction. And yeah, a lot of people have responded strongly to it. And I suspect you're right, Don, that the appeal of that story is how will Essie, the hero woman, come to what? Understanding, come to grips with her life. And her uncle, who's her correspondent, how will he deal with what becomes of her? Yeah, I think that you're right. That is sort of an obsessive story. And I'm I would like to think that there's something of the same drive in Maison Christine, given the extremity of the two major characters, Martin and Charlene, both fighting for their very existence, which is threatened by what? The pit of nothingness.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not surprising that The Poets has been so often anthologized. I think it's one of the best stories of the last 50 years. So it's an amazing piece. Good to see you.
Gene, let me ask just one more question before I have to go. But do you have, is there anything you want to say about what you hope will be your reader's experience of your fiction? Do you think about your reader when you're writing at all?
I think about readers like Don Berg. Who'll look into everything, every crevice, and find gold there. But as I began to try to be a writer, I did think about audience some, and then I found out I wasn't going to have a big audience, and that was that. So I tended to. I think there is a kind of a trope in modern literary criticism that every writer probably has an ideal reader sitting nearby. It might actually be a person or it might be a construct, and they write to that reader. So I think without pluming myself, I'd like to think that I'm writing to readers who really like to dig into the possibilities of fiction and who really appreciate language play in the way, as Don points out, that the structures of theme and the narrative movement are always riding on this current of language.
Okay. Thanks.
Anyone else? Yeah. Actually, Gene, I had a fairly simple question, but was there any significance to choosing New Orleans as the setting for Naughton's youth and much of his early years? Were you trying to tap into like New Orleans traditions or reputation, or could it just as well been New York or Boston or San Francisco? In other words, why'd you pick New Orleans as his home and the place he grew up?
Well, I suppose the simple answer is that the years that Naughton spent in New Orleans reflect the years that I spent in New Orleans. Okay. And New Orleans is a kind of weird and unforgettable city. It got me into trouble. I lost a friend who, reading the book, I think must have felt that I had betrayed the University of Tulane and betrayed all my fraternity brothers. I don't think that my classmates at Jesuit High School would have felt that I betrayed them, but I did lose that one friend. So there you have it. You use experiences that are real in your life, you fictionalize them, but you fail to fictionalize them sufficiently, and so some people will pick up and be offended. It might be worth mentioning that the figure of the scholastic Donnelly, who later becomes Father Donnelly, was definitely a character in my life when I was at Jesuit High School. He was an absolutely inspirational teacher, and It's not unlikely, though I don't think, the scene in his office where he warns Norton about his future. I don't think that scene reflects any particular conversation I had with Father Donnelly or with him, Mr. Donnelly. But he was sharp, very sharp, and it's not inconceivable. He would have warned a young man who was maybe a little too deft with words, that words could be his undoing. And maybe they were. Norton should never have married Cam. He knew better even when he was courting her. But of course, he had the gift of gab, and so he spun some language around her, and he managed to capture her into a marriage, which was not fortunate. It turns out, however, that she had a definite escape hatch, and that was she understood she was a character in Norton's story, the story of a man who married an exotic woman, fathered 2 children, etc. As soon as the 2 children were grown up, Cam checked out of that story. She didn't want to be in that story. In fact, Cam is, I think, maybe the most articulate voice in the novel about the danger of stories and how you can get captured. So Cam's answer to that is don't get in a story which has a sort of linear line to it. Go and get in a circle. The circle as an archetype is her home, or she means for it to be. And so she does. She gets in a circle, a weird cult, and they sit in a circle. And so she escapes Norton. Norton, in revenge, of course, burns down the house where the cult had their meetings. And so later in the novel, in a kind of visionary scene, Cam shows up, looking a little bit like a strange nun-like person, and confronts Norton with his dastardly deed of arson. So there's a person who was trapped in a story, got out of the story, and did so through a kind of conscious choice of a different sort of archetype, namely the archetype of the circle. Later in the book, Vought, the demon, is talking to Norton, and he says, I don't like stories. I don't like the linear aspect of them. He's in some ways close to Cam. He's looking for a reality that is not trapped in linear time sequence. So he said, you know, I have to admit, Norton, these stories you're telling Charlene seem to be pretty good for her. But he said, watch out, because stories have a kind of old-fashioned yearning to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and conform themselves to that archetype. And I think I was not only thinking about Vaught's words to Norton, but also I was listening to him myself and thinking, watch out when you write this novel that you don't have some simplistic beginning, middle, and end, and a wrap-up that explains everything on the last page. And I think maybe I succeeded in avoiding it. But the pull of that kind of narrative and fiction is absolutely enormous. And it's almost like a maelstrom. You have to, like Poe, catch on to some piece of flotsam to see if you can save yourself from traditional narrative.
Any other questions? I know, Scott, I know you read the book. Do you have any questions or comments for Gene? You got it. Unmute. Yeah, unmute.
You're muted, Scott.
There
Yep.
he is.
Thank you. And maybe unmuted is not the better part of me here. It was a very interesting read for me. I don't read this sort of book very often, and I have to tell you that I enjoyed it. I noticed in the very first page of the book, there's praise by Professor Frank, and I remember that Professor Frank spoke to our group last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago. In any event,
2 years ago, I think. Yeah.
He stretched my mind so much that I couldn't help think about the fact that you did a similar favor for me by making me to read something that I wouldn't normally read, and just get some enjoyment out of it. And thank you very much for that. I'm going to read it again.
Well, that'd be beyond the call of duty. But I appreciate those remarks. I thought I would like to read just a really short passage from an episode that you probably wouldn't think of as particularly important. It's the little episode in which a soldier, a veteran, probably of the, I don't know which war, it doesn't say, meets Stella, who's fled from New Orleans to San Francisco. She's been rejected by traditional orders of nuns, and so she is going to create one of her own, which she does. The little group of 4 of them in a rundown house in San Francisco. But this is before she does that. So the soldier shows up. The soldier is one of the frequenters of her Aunt Eddie's apartment. A whole troop of vets, particularly Marines, show up in Aunt Eddie's apartment. She's in hopes of finding somebody to replace her husband, the Marine who got killed at Ferrara. And so she's on her way to creating this little cell. And so the soldier is talking to her. And she says she's not going to call her order of nuns anything. And he says, not calling your order anything is going to be hard for people to get, sister. Sisters of no name. The man paces across the curtain's divide and returns simply. Wait a minute. You really mean nothing, don't you? Pure nothing. You think I don't know about nothing? I've seen it plenty. You wake up in the middle of the night. You don't remember where you are, probably because you don't want to. You look out from your past. Nothing. There can't be nothing, you say to yourself. You shake your head, blink your eyes, but there it is, nothing. What do you mean? That's what you mean, isn't it? What I mean has to be in a song. What song? I have to compose it. It's just coming into my head. The man leans toward Stella. Are you a musician? I play the piano. So this song, it comes after nothing? Stella said, there's a nothing beyond the nothing you're talking about, and then there's something beyond that. What is it? That's what my order will be about. So that's a pretty layered conversation. There's sort of what we typically think of as nothing, and then there's Stella's version, which is there's nothing, and then there's an even deeper nothing than the nothing you experience when you were in the Army. I think he's in the Marines. And then beyond that, a third layer, which is the something. That's what you have to get to. You have to go through at least 2 layers of nothingness to get to the layer of something. And if you get there, you will have something. Now, when the family visits Stella and her 3 nuns, they sing a song. Remember, Stella said to the soldier, I can't tell you what the something below the 2 layers of nothing is, but I'm going to make a song. So when they get there, she and the other nuns sing her the song. And the song sounds a good bit like the Tibetan chant, Om Mani Padme. But that's not exactly what it is. It's Stella's own song. They sing it, and Josh, the scientific son, said, well, does that mean anything? Or was that words? And she said, no, don't think of it that way. Think of lotus in a pond, which would make it close to the Tibetan chant, the wisdom of the lotus. So there's one answer to nothingness. Another answer comes from Sister Clare. Sister Clare confronting Naughton in his insistence on the power of nothingness says, there's one way to combat nothingness that I know of, and she doesn't give us Christian theology or doctrine. She says, the way you can know that there's not just nothingness is you can understand and experience the persistence of a self, because that self persists even as you change roles, as you change identities. It's always there, and that guarantees that there can't be nothingness. I don't know exactly how. She didn't really expand on that. But anyway, that's her answer to how you escape the demon of nothingness. It stunned everybody into silence.
Right. Anybody else have any comments or questions or anything?
Yeah, Gene, hi, it's Sheila Mahan.
Yeah.
How are you? I was late for class, and I haven't finished my homework yet either. So, but I just wanted to say that this discussion has been great, and I have started your book, and like David, I'm still in the kind of what the heck is going on here stage. But I feel like this conversation today has given me some guardrails or guideposts perhaps to understand it a little bit better. But I'm looking forward to getting
guardrails is good, or you might have fallen into the pit of nothing.
Hopefully not. Anyway, thank you, and thank you for signing the book. I've had it for a year now, and your talk today is what inspired me to move it to the top of my to be read pile. So,
well, I appreciate your persistence.
See, and that's why I have to read it again. I've got a guilty thing I need to share. They started talking about a song. All I could hear was the House of the Rising Sun in the background.
That's why I asked about New Orleans. Exactly.
Right. But apparently there's more than one house in New Orleans.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, Gene, I think Dean and I mentioned this too when we were chatting about your book. I think I have a pretty good vocabulary and I'm pretty well educated, but your vocabulary is outstanding. Maybe that's true with all English professors, but there were words that I've never heard of. I had to look up a lot more words than I normally do in a novel. So I was impressed. Excellent. Good. If there's nothing else, then we'll.
I have one more thing I want to just raise. I mean, sure. the song obviously was in some sense the answer, and that's the situation. Music is generally the answer, I think, in Gene's work. You want to say something about that, Gene?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go back to a kind of musical archetype of mine, and that's Mahler's Third Symphony. In maybe the fifth movement, I'm not sure I'll get it right. The singer proposes the question that Nietzsche had proposed in his little poem. O Mensch, gib acht, was spricht die tiefe Mitternacht? O man, pay attention. What is the deep midnight saying? The poem goes on, to me, to answer the question in an unsatisfactory way. So I like leaving the question as it is, and then going on to that last long, magnificent last symphony, the last movement of that symphony. And that is the answer to the question, what is the deep midnight saying? You have to listen to that final movement. So I'm in agreement with Don. Music is finally the one medium that will not permit paraphrase or exposition or anything of the sort. It is what it is. And I think that's what Stella in her little makeshift nunnery is saying to Josh. No, they're not words here. If you want to know what it is we have discovered, it's in this song. She will have said, I think, before that she and her colleagues, her fellow nuns, try to put themselves into states of being. If you're in a state of being, you don't have to worry about nothing, because being is forever and persistent. And the way they do that is the simplest way possible, just by sharing a little domestic routine, so that those routines become a kind of sanctification. But yes, little ritual routines and music. That's how she gets away from the threat of nothingness. Yeah, music, absolutely.
Well, I see that Bob McFarland's raised his hand remotely, and I think he tried to send a text too. So, Bob, why don't you unmute and maybe turn your video on and ask Gene a question or make a comment?
Maybe Bob fell into the pit of nothingness.
Yeah, it could be. Or if you want to, you could just send us it by chat or Q&A, Bob, if you're having trouble with your audio video. Yeah. I don't know. It looks like Bob's having some technical problems. I think Neil Murray also said he was having some technical problems. Was difficulty with the audio because of a weak internet connection. Maybe that's Bob's problem too. I don't know.
Yeah.
Where is Bob anyway? Do we know?
What was that about, Bob, Gene?
Where is he? Do we know where he is?
I think he's still in the Albany area. At least he was as of a few months ago. I know he actually recently resigned from our board because he said he was having some health issues. But as and I think there was some discussion he might move to Florida or a warmer climate, but I think Scott, Dean, do you guys know anything more about what
I don't.
Bob's up to?
No.
But it looks like he's having some difficulty. I've sent him several notes about unmuting and turning on audio, but nothing seems to be happening. I'll type him an answer.
Even the sign of his nothingness has disappeared from the.
Yeah.
Gene, while we're waiting for that, I wonder if are you working on anything now? Are you working on a new book?
Yeah, I am working on a new book. It's at least as strange as anything I've written before. Tell you the plot in a sentence or two. There's a guy who's been persuaded by his wife and his son to seek out a therapist because he's eating himself to death, literally, mostly with sweets. And he's become obese, and he's going to have fatal obesity before long. And so the therapist's job is to figure out why is he doing this self-destructive thing. And the answer is somewhere in his relationship with an aunt he had, and whom he attended in her final sickness. And she was a gracious Southern belle, but his relationship to her is fraught with all kinds of complexity, and he's having a lot of trouble getting out of it. So that's the plot. It makes me think I'm always writing about people who are getting ready to slip over the edge. I don't know if I'll be able to rescue him or not.
So you don't know where it's going to end.
No, I don't. I know some wrinkles. I know he's going to stop eating a whole lot of sweets and avoid dying of obesity. But I think he's going to go the other way and stop eating completely. And then he's going to have the threat of starvation. So he's caught between two extremities. And I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get him out of it or if I want to.
I'm seeing a little bit of similarity in the book that we're talking about today. The extremes and the sort of conversation between I don't know what you'd call it, therapist, confessor.
Right. Yeah. Well, if you're fabulous, extremities are your cup of tea.
Irresistible, right?
I don't know. I've sent Bob several notes asking him to unmute and turn on his video, but there must be a problem on his end. So,
well, maybe he'll communicate with us later.
Yeah. Maybe he'll let us know afterwards. Okay. But I want to thank Gene very much for the time he spent with us. Thought it was very informative and enlightening, especially for us non-authors and non-English professors. And just for upcoming attractions, I did want to let people know in 2 weeks, October 16th, we're having a special panel discussion on innovative aging, which I think it should be an interesting topic for all of us, given the fact that we're all emeriti. And I think we're featuring 3 directors of agencies in the Albany area that are devoted to healthy and innovative aging. But I'll turn it over to Dean and Scott from the program committee to maybe just briefly fill us in on a little more detail for that.
Well, the one thing to note is that it's it's a change of venue. We're going to be in the Campus Center 375, and we'll keep you informed if there is a change to that. We're really, really interested in having these folks with us for a panel. Greg Olson, who's with the New York State Office for the Aging, Mary Muller of the Albany Guardian Society, and Nicole McFarland of Senior Hope Counseling. And Ed and other people, other Emeriti had heard these three folks at other presentations and found them very, very good. So we're really looking forward to it. And I'm thinking we'll probably have a good attendance.
Yeah.
Anything to add, Scott? Or
it's in the campus center, as you mentioned, and there'll be coffee and tea and
yes, refreshments.
Free refreshments.
Yes.
And we're unfortunately parking's not free, but we're working on that, and hopefully we'll be able to come up with some solution to that. If people want to come and don't have a campus parking permit, that we can somehow arrange parking without charge. But we'll let you know on that one. We're still working on it. So hopefully we'll see everybody there, and great. If not, anything else, Scott, Dean, you guys want to add before we sign off?
Gene, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciated you being here, and listening to you was a real pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's been my pleasure and an honor to be here.
Yeah. It's too bad we couldn't do it in person, but at least this is the next best thing. So
right.
Certainly better than canceling or rescheduling, for sure. All right, then. So everybody have a nice afternoon. It's beautiful out there. In fact, I can't wait to go outside myself. Yeah. But hopefully we'll see you in 2 weeks. All right.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Yep, thanks again.